over 20 network meta-analyses on psoriasis. And I keep getting asked to review really poor systematic reviews. Now, I just can't keep up with this volume. So here is the monthly evidence update. Douglas Grindley, a wonderful information specialist, who will sadly be leaving us at the end of this month. But one of my jobs, along with Professor Kim Thomas, my co-director, is to look through these and check that they are legitimate. And I can't even check them now. There's too many, 96, even in my own field of eczema and atopic dermatitis. Cannot keep up. There are just too many there. Now, too many would be fine. But the question is, are they all needed? Now, I've mentioned now, network meta-analysis, great. That's going a bit further than sort of pairwise comparisons. But come on. 20 and counting network meta-analysis for psoriasis treatments. So you know, this is something we will look at. Laura's on the line will probably do something with me. You might have seen Peter Tugwell's and colleagues suggested consensus checklist for when to replicate, maybe 2 reviews, you know, if there, or an update or something in looking at different color skin or something like that. But come on, 20 is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And how can the average clinician make sense of all this with so many reviews being published? And I wouldn't mind so much if there were 20,000 questions to be answered in dermatology, because dermatology is huge. But the sad fact is that most are low quality. So this is some work led by Laurence Lecléache and colleagues. And, you know, this is the bottom line. This is a random sample of 140 systematic reviews in 2017, quality rated with Amstar. Look, only 15% registered a protocol, and 90% low quality. That's appalling, absolutely appalling. What was the predictor of high quality? Not surprisingly, journals insisting on Prisma. Look at that odds ratio. When did you last see an odds ratio of that magnitude? 27. And of course, impact factor, 1.9 for each increase in point of impact factor. So, you know, impact factor of 5 would be near 10. So these were the predictors. But the bottom line is that most are low quality in dermatology. And there's only one thing worse than no systematic review, and that is a misleading systematic review. So recently I was asked to referee a paper on the notion of spin in abstracts of systematic reviews of atopic dermatitis by in this journal called Dermatology. I don't normally review for them, but Gregor Yermek knows me as the editor and said, this is right up your street, Hywel. And it's quite an interesting article. It'll be coming out very soon, but Gregor did ask me to do an editorial, and I thought I would put my thoughts to paper in terms of what I think the main problems or the top 7 sins of dermatology systematic reviews, excluding spin, which is going to be the number 8, I think. But let's just run through them, and they all begin with the letter S. So some are superficial, salami, selective systematic reviews, sloppy systematic reviews, seen before, specious, and seriously wrong. Let me unpack these. Superficial, what do I mean here? I mean narrow topics of questionable clinical value. And I think I do have some sympathy, particularly for medical students. Systematic reviews, you've got to start somewhere, but I think it's incumbent upon senior authors to show more responsibility and undertake some form of prioritization with, ideally with patients and public. You're all familiar with salami publication, chopping up a topic into small pieces in order to obtain as many publications as possible. And the solution here is for editors to spot it and reviewers and to decline potential salami topics and encourage broader reviews. And I do a lot of reviewing, and I often say, well, I hope these team are not going to do the same thing on psoriasis, then lichen planus, then atopic dermatitis, then acne, because I do see that happening quite frequently. That's salami systematic reviews. Selective. So this is failing, the concept of failing to register the protocol for a systematic review and only then reporting or highlighting in the abstract the outcomes that look interesting And I mean, it's a form of selective reporting outcome bias, isn't it? It's like this old cartoon I used to show on throwing a dart and then drawing a dartboard around where the dart lands. And the solution here is for funders, journals to make prospective registration on Prospero or another suitable prospective registration method absolutely mandatory. Sloppy systematic reviews. Here I'm referring to poorly reported reviews. When you're trying to see if it's a good or a bad review, you just can't see. It could be a sparkling diamond, but you don't know because the things are not reported properly. Even basic PRISMA reporting guidelines. And you see, it's no good just signing up to saying on your author instructions, you must complete PRISMA checklist. You have to check those responses. Don't take my word for it. Even if it's me, don't take my word. So for 10 years, I worked as clinical trials editor for the Journal of Investigative Dermatology. And there I introduced prospective registration with Lowell Goldsmith and Barbara Gilchrist, and also completing a consort checklist. And what I noticed is that some people were pulling a fast one. They just tick away the consort checklist and say it's on page 5. No, it wasn't. And they just tick this. So you do have to check this, and it doesn't have to be, you know, the editors. What I did with the JID was to teach the editorial staff there. They became very proficient at checking compliance with consort, and this is something that journal teams could do as well. So reviews need to be reported adequately, so you have a lens on whether it's high quality or low quality. Sin number 5 is seen before. I think I've seen this film before, and this is what I'm referring to here is not overt duplication, say in another language, or an update, or a clear rationale for verifying a result, but covert duplication. And here's an example. Douglas Grinley again helped draw my attention to this, and when I saw this review, because I'm interested in keratinocyte cancer as well, I thought, hang on, I've seen these numbers before, you know, 5.2, and hang on, and it's sort of repeating the same mistakes in the other review. And of course, the authors are completely different. Look, different authors. It's exactly the same review. And checking the submission times, they were sent simultaneously. So what did I do? I wrote to the editors of these journals, silence. Wrote again, oh, yes, we'll look into this, hoping they would communicate, silence. Further chasing up 8 months later, oh, no, that person has moved on now, I'll be picking it up. And eventually they wrote to the authors and their institution, silence, which is often what happens. Ian Chalmers is a great exponent for this. It's often met by just silence. And eventually, 1 year later, the Journal of Cosmetic Dermatology one has been retracted. But it's still there in PubMed, but if you try and click on the document, it's retracted. But, oh, come on, hard work. Yeah, that was hard work, but it does occur, covert duplication. This is another sin that I'm very aware of, particularly with sausage factories that are used to playing with RevMan, and there they are pressing these buttons, meta-analysis, and they're coming out with abstracts with all these numbers, and big numbers often give the uninformed an air of spurious precision. 4.98, ooh, that sounds precise. And if you're not aware or how to critically appraise a systematic review, it's easy to sort of be bamboozled by these, especially if you don't have any expertise in your editorial team. And the problem with these reviews is that they very rarely have adequate clinical content expertise. It's absolutely essential, and whether you're doing a trial or a systematic review, knowing the material and the issues and the practicalities is absolutely key. And I'm sure my colleague Dr. Freeman would agree. For guidelines, it's absolutely essential as well. So the solution here is you must employ, given the profusion of systematic reviews, an associate editor with systematic review expertise. And finally, seriously wrong. Again, this is a consequence of the sausage factory approach. And again, this was one of those reviews on topical imiquimod for keratinocyte carcinoma, and they get past journal editors because, and here's an example of a serious editor error. If you look at this forest plot, you can see here Barth Hextall and Williams HC. It's the same study. What have they done? They've included the data 4 times. And these two are the same study, and I think these are the same study as well. It's a very fundamental error, but it wouldn't have occurred if they talked to clinical content. It was done in a sort of very mechanical sort of way, and that has some advantage in that it's away from the clinical people who may have some vested interests or concerns, but it's seriously wrong. And Emma Axon and Douglas wrote to the Journal of Dermatology Treatment to point out this error, but they haven't corrected it. You know, if you go on PubMed, you'll see the letter, but they haven't corrected it, so that's still a problem. Yes, I know what you're going to say, and that is people who live in glass houses should not throw stones. And I'm sure I'm human, I'm fallible, and I'm sure if you look at some of my older reviews, I have some basic errors in it as well. So you know, my plan here is not to condemn well-intentioned efforts, but I have had enough of poor quality systematic reviews. And I do think, and I'm not the first to point this out, this was an article that influenced me and really pushed me towards the tipping point by John Ioannidis on his polemic of redundant, misleading and conflicted systematic reviews and meta-analysis. So personally, I think we've come to the point where dermatology systematic reviews in the published literature are spinning out of control. Not Cochrane. Cochrane ones have remained the same, if not sort of slightly less, but they're better and better quality and better prioritized. But I'm talking here about systematic reviews across the whole of dermatology. That is the target of this talk. And the thing is, you see, just when you fix one journal, you know, British Journal of Dermatology has a really good systematic review, associate editor, so does JAD, and, you know, so the trouble is they get rejected in BJD here, and JAD, or Archives of Dermatology here, you know, they'll find a home in Journal of Dermatological Treatment or Journal of Cosmetic Dermatology where the expertise may not be present. This is the problem with 350 plus dermatology journals. It's almost difficult not to get them published, but if you put the word systematic review in the title, you're in with a good chance. And I've been very influenced by Ian Chalmers and Paul Glacier's work on research waste. You may be familiar with this series of articles describing the anatomy, if you like, of cumulative research waste, and they you know, point out here in the second box, you know, you can't do a study unless you refer to existing evidence in a systematic review, a view that I ascribe to. And when I was director of the health technology assessment program in the UK, this is something we'd always want to see. Where's your systematic review? But I'm afraid the current way dermatology systematic reviews are spinning out of control, it's actually contributing to rather than solving research waste. So what are the reasons? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but these are some of the things that I think are important. Lack of researcher training, and not just researchers, but research users. You're all research users, and if you see something, write in, complain, or discuss in your journal club. Failure of funders to identify and prioritize, and indeed sometimes commission the systematic reviews that are needed. I think there's tremendous university pressure to publish. It's still there, encouraging publication addiction, which I actually suffer from terribly. And if you're interested in the concept of publication, have a look at Andrew Finley's really challenging article here in the BJD that came out recently. It's absolutely amusing, but so true, like all good humor. I think journal editors and publishers have a huge responsibility. Given the profusion of systematic reviews, you have to have somebody with systematic review expertise on your editorial board. And of course, there are financial interests at play. One of those network of meta-analysis, a lot of conflicted authors there, and not surprisingly, which drug looks best? It's the drug supported by those conflicted people. So, you know, there are, you know, where financial interests, because they're not stupid, you know, they realize the influence of systematic reviews and informing guidelines and practice, so you have to be aware of it. Or there may be just plain lack of awareness out there of how to critically appraise a systematic review, even though start 2 is easy peasy. But the point I'm making on this slide, it's not just one bad apple. It is a sort of society, it's a complex that involves a number of stakeholders, funders, higher education institutes, journals, readers, financial interest. It's not just 1 or 2 evil people, it's a number of factors that all need to be thought of. Well, I'm very aware today I'm preaching to the wrong people. I need to get out to the 350 other journals, but the solutions, in my view, at least these 2 solutions will sort out 95% of the problem. The first is this concept: place your bet, show us your hand. Place your bet, register your protocol in Prospero or suitable alternative, and show us your hand. Report your systematic review properly according to PRISMA guidance. Very, very simple. Place your bet, show us your hand. Second solution: less research, but better research. This is Dieter Rams, one of the greatest designers of our time. He wrote this wonderful book, 10 Principles for Good Design, less but better. And how often do you see that phrase at the end of a scientific article: more research is needed? No, no, more research is not needed. Less research is needed, but better research. Well, looking back, you know, to 1997, look how innocent I look there, that enormous computer screen there. Have I created a monster? Well, I don't think so, and I can't be, you know, I'm very proud and pleased with the way Cochrane's skin has progressed, but I can't be held responsibility for abuse of systematic reviews and the explosion that's occurred. So what can we do in Cochrane's skin? I think we can continue to promote the concept of prioritization. Don't ever compromise on quality. Get involved, influence, and help journal editors. Write to them and say, look, this is terrible. Do you want any help? I'm not suggesting you become associate editors to 300 journals, but we're lots of people in Cochrane's skin. We could do more. Seek therapy for publication addiction. This is one of my tasks. Promote core outcome sets, which in my view is one of the greatest obstacles facing not just dermatology, but all Cochrane systematic reviews and meta-analysis, because if you've got 20 different outcomes, it's very difficult to perform a meta-analysis. And I know Jan Kottner will be talking about that next. And continue to innovate. I mean, look at the way Cochrane's skin now, as you heard yesterday from Susie Crow, that, you know, a prospectively planned meta-analysis, wow. Individual patient data meta-analysis, double wow, and it's going to be living and updated. I mean, it's the ultimate, isn't it, in terms of state of the art at the moment. And other things like the living psoriasis meta-analysis, Laurence Leclerc's work, wonderful, wonderful. So I'm delighted you are continuing to innovate. And I just want to leave you with another thought, and that is a thought that the joy of joining up. And I heard Esther Freeman just talk about it then, you know, shouldn't we be working more with living guidelines and living network meta-analysis? You're absolutely right. And this is the concept of the evidence ecosystem. So rather than systematic reviews sitting there as an organization looking for audiences, instead, you get a pull, you get a need pulled by the clinical and patient community. We need evidence on here. Evidence is done. It may identify gaps that are then addressed by primary research, patients at the center, and you've got these living guidelines closely attached to living network meta-analysis. And you've seen some of this with the COVID network meta-analysis and also the MAGIC evidence ecosystem as a result of the COVID. So it's possible. It is possible to create these ecosystems, and I wish you good luck in achieving that aim. So I'm going to stop there, and happy to take questions, having left you with these provoking thoughts. I'll stop sharing screen now.
Thank you very much, Hywel, for those illuminating thoughts and comments. We have a hand up in the audience from Daniel Ortega, one of our current Cochrane AAD fellows. Daniel? And perhaps he's left his microphone.
We can't hear you, Daniel. Do you want to put something in the chat?
We'll move on to Bob Boyle, who has his hand up as well, and come back to Daniel when he's back at his microphone.
Thank you, Hal, for a beautiful presentation and well, a very concerning summary, really. And I guess it makes it very difficult for the end users, doesn't it? What would be your top tips for when you were running Cochrane Skin? Really, almost every skin condition was covered, and Cochrane has done what you've suggested. Really, is doing less and really focusing on the highest priorities of the moment. So for someone who's dealing with a patient with lichen sclerosis, they might look and they say, oh look, the Cochrane review is 10 years out of date, so I want to look at something else to guide my management. Would you say, and I think we need a quick way to understand whether a systematic review is credible or not. I guess from your talk, is it in a good journal? Was it registered and reported according to PRISMA guidelines?
Yep.
And have a peek at the acknowledgements section to see who funded it. But
yeah. I'm laughing because, you know, it's one of the things I teach. Exactly those, you know, what's it all about? Is it registered? Has it been reported to PRISMA? Have a look at the acknowledgements and even search the authors, because sometimes they don't acknowledge. I know who they are, and I know most people's conflicts, and they're sometimes concealed. So absolutely. But I think, you know, I take your point, you know, but, you know, there may be a case for updating that lichen sclerosis guidelines. Let them put the case to you. And if indeed there's a strong patient voice saying, look, you know, there's a pile of new studies come out there. It's important. And I saw that on the AAD list, you know, is there data? And as a funder, as a national funder of systematic reviews, we often heard the comment from the funding panel, well, they haven't done a scoping review. Is there going to be data there which is likely to change conclusions or change clinical practice? That's one of the key issues there. But I think the bottom line, Bob, is that and AMSTAR 2 is dead easy to do. I mean, it's so easy to whip through, isn't it? So you know, we are trying to teach our new trainees how to critically appraise the systematic review quickly, not as, you know, majoring in the topic. But I think that has to be all of the things you mentioned, plus increasing reader training is absolutely crucial.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the panel or the audience? If not, Hal, we'll let you change guard here with Jan Kottner from the CS Cousin Initiative. Hi, Jan. The floor is yours.
Hi, Robert. Can you hear me? Very good. So I'm trying to share my screen then. All right, so you can see my slides. Very good. Okay, so yeah, thank you very much for this invitation to talk here at the annual Cochrane Skin meeting, and thank you all for pointing already to a very important topic we are dealing with for quite a long time now. So yeah, I would like to talk about core outcome sets and the core outcome set initiative of Cochrane Skin. And what I'm going to present here, it's not my own work, so it's really group work. So on behalf of all the people who are involved. So Hywel, you mentioned already the waste of research series. And of course, there are many other important publications addressing this question. And and you mentioned already that the non-comparable outcomes used in clinical research and systematic review is one important reason why evidence-based practice is limited. And I would say there are at least two aspects or perspectives, but in fact, there are many more. So, but from the perspective of the trialist, what we know is that trialists, when they're preparing their protocol, they use outcomes, they are then not considered relevant by systematic reviewers. So they produce evidence, but this evidence is never considered in any systematic review or meta-analysis. And the other way around, when a systematic reviewer is creating his or her protocol, they also predefine normally primary, secondary review outcomes. And very often, and this is true for Cochrane and many other reviews, is that these outcomes are finally not measured in trials. So this is a problem in general. And sometimes we have also the case that similar outcomes are used and measured, but if they are measured in very different non-comparable ways. So it is, as I said already, so the non-comparable outcomes is one of the most important problems for effective meta-analysis. And what is also an aspect, but I would not like to go into this, is that the relevance of outcomes that are measured in trials, maybe also looked at systematic reviews, is also sometimes questionable. So the clinical relevance for patients, for clinicians. What I just briefly summarized is true for many areas of healthcare and medicine, but it's also particularly true for skin. So in 2015, a random sample of Cochrane reviews, so published Cochrane reviews at that time, have been sought. So it was about 60 reviews published at that time. And all the review outcomes have been extracted. In parallel, the underlying clinical trials, which have been included in these 10 systematic reviews, Cochrane reviews, have been also checked again. And these were 220, and more than 1,000 trial outcomes have been identified. Then next, both were compared, and key results was that about more than 2/3 of trial outcomes have not been included in any of these systematic reviews. So evidence is produced, but it's no longer used anymore. So whether this is good or bad evidence is, of course, a matter of question. And the other way around, 1/3 of review outcomes that have been pre-specified have not been reported in any clinical trial. And what is also important, so looking at the reviews is good, but ideally we want to do meta-analysis, and this was impossible for nearly half of all primary review outcomes. So this is, so it was a situation, and a possible solution to this problem is the idea to develop core outcome sets. So the first attempts to standardize outcomes in clinical trials and reviews date back to the 1970s. In fact, this was a WHO initiative at that time. And since then, huge developments have been taking place. So before I want to continue, I want to make it very clear what we within Cochrane Skin Cousin, what we understand what an outcome is. So it is what is being measured on trial participants or patients in clinical practice to examine the effect of an exposure to a health intervention. So an outcome should be something which is a result of an intervention. So I emphasize this because very often we have discussions what actually outcomes are. And the core outcome sets has been defined as a standardized set of outcomes that should be measured and reported as a minimum in all clinical trials in a specific disease or trial population. Minimum means that every trialist is free to measure whatever he or she wants to measure, but if a core outcome set is available, it should be measured. Broadly speaking, core outcomes consist of two parts. The first one is the concept or the outcome domain or construct, and it essentially asks what is being measured. And if it is clear what you want to measure, then the next question is how to measure the outcome, and then usually you use a type of outcome measurement instrument. So an instrument does not always need to be a long standardized assessment instrument, for example. It can also be a simple yes/no answer, for example. Within dermatology, I think the most successful and established initiative is the Harmonizing Outcome Measures for Eczema initiative, the HOME initiative, and it is very influential. And based on the success of this movement, of this HOME group, the Cochrane Skin Core Outcome Set Initiative was founded now 6 years ago. So we had an inaugural meeting in 2015, and the idea of Cochrane Skin Cousin is to support the development and implementation of high-quality core outcome sets in dermatology. The idea is to provide methodological guidance and active support of cost development groups. And what you can see here in this triangle is that we have a methods group, I will show you in a minute, a management team, but most important, of course, are the project groups or the cost development groups. So those groups who are actually developing core outcome sets. The methods group consists of experienced researchers or experts in the field of core outcome sets. And what is really the quality criterion of Cousin is that each project or group, so each cost group is assigned, you can say a methods peer or advisor, or at least an independent colleague who remains with the group for the duration of the program. So it is a little bit like a peer review system, if you like. And what the methods group is also doing, so we are developing and oversee cost development standards. So this is not necessarily inventing something new, but at least we are trying really to keep up to date. And if someone is interested to develop a core outcome set within Cousin, we require to meet certain standards. And these standards are, for example, preparing a protocol a priori, following certain steps, following certain reporting guidelines, and so on and so forth. So it's very similar also to other areas of research. And I do not want to go too much into detail, but what you can see on this slide is the typical process, or the processes how, in principle, the way is to develop core outcome sets. So here, I don't know whether you can see my cursor. So it usually starts here. And the idea is to provide or to submit a proposal form. So we asking groups for some very basic questions. So do you actually need it? Why do we need this? Who is in your group? And so on. Then this proposal is reviewed and we give feedback. And if we say, yes, that's a good project, then groups are invited to prepare the full protocol for their course. Then they submit this again. And ideally, after going through all the process, they end up with domains. So if you have outcome domains, then the next step is to select instruments, outcome measurement instruments for these domains. The process ends with dissemination. So this is the overall goal, I think, of all the core outcome set movement, to finally disseminate, to implement, and to improve trials, systematic reviews to finally reduce the research waste. Currently, we have 22 groups who are affiliated to COSN. And what you can see also here is that some groups were successful already and published core outcome domains. And there are also some groups who have developed instruments already, outcome measurement instruments, or at least for certain domains published instruments already. So this is just a snapshot of all what is ongoing within COSN. And so it is still a very new group, I would say. And but at least I might say that we as the group are somehow recognized by the global COS community. So for example, we are part of the Red Hat group. So we meet at regular intervals and discuss major issues in core outcome set development. And we have a close collaboration, for example, with COMET initiative and also related activities. So despite all the successes we have already, all the benefits or advantages we provide for the groups, of course, we face a number of challenges. And I would like to present only a few of them. So the first one is that usually a core outcome set is defined as what to measure, so the domain and how the instrument. But we very often discussed or learned that this simple distinction might not be sufficient. Because even if you say, okay, I know what to measure and I know, for example, which instrument to use, then still there is heterogeneity in reporting the metric, for example. So is it a success, yes or no thing? Is it a proportion? Is it time to event? So it has something to do with the metric and with the method of aggregation. There are pros and cons. So we're discussing this with other colleagues also outside COSN, but it is not an easy solution. What is also a problem is that although this, I would say, is a worldwide movement now, so everyone is talking about core outcomes, but if you talk to OMEREC people or to the grade people, for example, then the same concepts or the words are used, the same terms, but there are slight differences in the meaning. So what is a core domain? What is an outcome? What exactly is a core outcome? So, and this is sometimes not easy to really find out what exactly is meant by this term or concept. A big problem, and this is something, so we get a lot of feedback for it, especially from the cost groups within COSN, is the required level of abstraction or granularity of outcomes and outcome definitions. I'll give you a very simple example. So you may say, okay, we have a skin disease and an important domain. So what to measure is clinical signs and symptoms. So this is perfect, but on the other hand, you can also say it is erythema. So it's very specific, it's a different level, but still it's a what. Maybe erythema for this skin disease is really, really crucial, it's core, but obviously there is a huge difference in the granularity. And that is especially challenging, especially for new groups, because when you do the literature reviews and you extract all the outcomes, it is sometimes not easy to decide on which level of granularity you actually are expected to extract these outcomes. Finally, we are deeply convinced that a dermatology-specific outcome classification is needed. And the reason is a quite practical thing, to reduce also a little bit the duplication effort. Because what you have seen in the table before, we have 22 groups, and there are many more groups developing costs for skin diseases. And when you closely look on what these groups produce and the domains they identify, of course, there is some overlap. And the question is a little bit, maybe there is a kind of, let's say, universal core outcomes in skin diseases. So there, again, there are pros and cons. But a dermatology specific outcome classification at least might be helpful. So we, based on the results of the reviews we did, we made a first proposal, but of course this is really pioneering work and we are very much at the beginning. We also have group or cousin specific challenges. And at first of all, of course, it's a pandemic situation. So all these groups need to meet regularly. You need to involve patients and doing focus groups and so on. Of course, online is everything possible, but still it has some disadvantages. So especially when involving patients, for example. So the progress for many groups has slowed. So I'm involved also in two projects, and this is really a problem. Another problem is, or at least the challenge we have, is that all the work we are doing is completely voluntary. So we have, of course, it's Cochrane, so we have totally independent from any industry funding. So, but of course, this also means that it is somehow limited. So we have a lot of ideas and there are many things we want to do. But of course, it's if you don't have funding for this, it's very difficult. And this is also true for many cost groups. So many of them are also not funded. So we are really interested for individuals who would like to work within Cousin. So want to do research and maybe also help with administration, which would be also great. And a good idea might be, for example, early career researchers. So if there's someone who says, okay, I want to go into the classification question, for example, or another methodological challenge, so he or she is highly welcome. We are very happy that as today we are always part of these annual meetings. And the idea was, but again, a little bit difficult now because of the pandemic situation, to have standalone meetings from this year on, which does not mean that we are not interested to be part of the annual Cochrane Skin meeting, of course. But the idea is to provide a platform for all the cousin groups who actually want to meet and do work. So that in terms of consensus meetings, focus groups, whatever. So currently we are planning an e-meeting in October. And the idea is to provide e-rooms for registered cost groups. And there are some groups already who really said they're interested because they want to meet and want to have some further input. So, and these are the plans for at least this year. Yeah, if you want to know more details, you are more than welcome to visit the website. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jan, for this presentation on core outcome sets and the Cochrane Skin Cousin Initiative. Do we have any questions or comments for Jan? I was wondering, are any of the groups prioritized in terms of the need? If somebody is undifferentiated in their desire to help and starting out a new career, is there one, two, or three of the groups that need people more than any other right now from your perspective?
Well, so this is difficult to tell because the groups work quite independently. So, of course, as I said, we require to meet certain standards and certain methodological issues need to be considered, but the progress also of the groups is sometimes very different, whether they have funding, whether they have not funding, whether it is a huge group or a smaller group, and you said it already, Robert, so it's PhD students are involved. Once when the PhD project is finished, then very often the activity slows down. So this is also the reason, and what you have seen in the table, we have a number of groups who have identified domains, but now the real issue or the challenge is now you should identify outcome measurement instruments per domains.
So
otherwise it's complicated.
Perhaps you would prioritize those groups. Maybe you could pull that slide back up, and I see Bob has his hand up.
Sorry, Rob, is that for me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, you might. I had one question, Jan, which is because these projects, they take quite a long time to get through to the instrument level, and then obviously potentially work developing new instruments, and lots of trials going on in the meantime, which continue to have different outcomes, and you know, it's hard to pull them all together and make sense of it. Are there any shortcuts? So are there recurrent, you know, if you're looking beyond the skin and in the core outcome world generally, you know, can you bring shortcuts to the domains, for example? If you've got a chronic disease, can you just say, look, the domains are likely to be, you know, safety, symptoms, investigator rated severity, quality of life? Can you make those sorts of shortcuts, or is it really you've got to go through the full process and take, you know, often many years?
So this is an excellent question. So a simple answer would be yes. So probably there are shortcuts. I will give you a very simple example. So ideally, when you start developing core outcome domains, you start with a so-called long list. The long list means you have a list with all possible outcome domains that have ever been measured or might be important for measuring treatment effects in this disease. So, and how do you achieve it? So you look into published trials, you should look into qualitative research, into patient reports. You need to do interviews with patients or with other relevant stakeholders. So this takes a long time. And when you look in current guidance, this is the right way to do. At the same time, and you mentioned this already, you can ask yourself, okay, when looking at all these different skin diseases, so obviously there are like clinical signs and symptoms, quality of life. So these really important things that are important for all these diseases, whether it is actually needed to do a full systematic review, to do all the patient interviews again and again, and then they tell you, okay, it's hurting, and I'm, so these are the, but it is, so there are some people who strongly believe that this is an appropriate shortcut, but at the same time, it is difficult, because the thing is that even if there is a lot of methodological guidance, for example, what COMET is producing, so for how to write protocols, so we have the COMET handbook, so and when you go through this, of course, this is not considered state of the art. So, and the question is also, I would say we don't know what is the best way to create a core outcome set. Because when you look into the literature, there, of course, different groups have different approaches. And it is not very easy to tell right now this approach is right or wrong. And it is also very difficult on which criteria you would decide it. So, yeah, so the simple answer, yes, and there are probably other shortcuts, but I'm a little bit hesitating right now, because the thing is what Hywel said about less research but better research. I would say it's very true for core outcome sets as well. And having a wrong core outcome set, which is wrongly developed, is even worse than having no core outcome set. And there are a few examples also in dermatology where groups independently developed or are developing core outcome sets. And of course, we within COSIN try to connect people. So this is also one of our ideas, but sometimes it's not so easy. So there's an American group focusing on a certain topic and a European group. And then I had a really intense discussion with the Europeans, and they say, well, our core outcome set represents the European perspective. A little bit similar to what the speaker with AAD before talked about the guidelines, right? So do we need US guidelines and do we need European guidelines? So, and this is, of course, a situation, especially in core outcome sets, we don't want to have it. Because what would this mean then for trialists and systematic reviewers? So then you have the choice which core outcome set to select. So I think this is even worse.
Thank you. There's a oh, sorry, Rob. I don't know whether. Yeah,
I see Dr. Ortega has his hand up. Yeah. Dr. Ortega, do you want to ask a question?
There's a comment from Alex Ortega. I don't know whether you can see that, Jan, in the box, whether you want to speak to that.
Yeah, so probably I need to stop.
We can read it out. So Alex says, funding is an issue, but educational research grants from pharmaceutical companies have been an alternative that we've been using in the upgrade project.
So yes, of course. If you have, so industry, for example, when selecting core outcomes, of course, this is an important stakeholder group, and they definitely should be involved in those processes as well. And if you then, yeah, even can get funding for this, why not? So I do not see a problem. What we learned from industry partners, that they are really interested in having these core outcome sets as well, because it finally helps everyone, because of course industry also funds a lot of trials. Of course, because we are affiliated to Cochrane Skin, of course, are very strict in this, so we have no industry relation at all. So, but yeah, having that there are individual groups who are funded, this is of course helpful, I think.
And thank you, Jan, for that update on CS COSIN. Hopefully we'll get more people involved with doing less research better in this domain as well. I want to thank everybody again for joining us today for the second day of our Cochrane annual skin group meeting. It's been an exciting 2 days. I've been thrilled to listen to the talks, and I want to thank all of the speakers for contributing to such a vital session. I want to thank everybody for attending, and hopefully look forward to seeing you collaborating with Cochrane Skin in the year to come, and attending our meeting next year as soon as we figure out how and when we will do it. So thank you all.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Jan.